Yo, what is up guys? It is Bumfris, back with another episode of Pro Revenge. Today's episode is an absolute banger and I know you're gonna love this one. Like I said in the last video, if this video can hit 5,000 likes, the next episode of Entitled Parents will be 30 minutes long. We haven't been able to hit it yet, but as soon as we do, I guarantee that video will be out the next day. If you're new, don't forget to subscribe, then sit back, relax, and laugh at some Pro Revenge. I spent about 10 years teaching high school humanities at a small private school. For my first 2 years, I didn't have a classroom, just a small office that I would bring what I needed for each class on a cart and go from room to room, depending on which teacher had a prep at any given time. This was incredibly inconvenient, and not being the most organized of teachers to begin with made things difficult to keep track of. There was this group of 11th grade boys who decided to make things a little more difficult for me. They were good kids and we got along well, and I coached several of them on the school soccer team. But they decided that since my office would often be empty, it was a great place to prank. It was never anything too serious, things falling over when I opened the door, or things disappearing for a day and then turning up in a different place the next day. Nothing was ever damaged, and I could never prove who it was, even though I knew. My school had mandatory final exams in each academic course. I didn't really think they were necessary, so I would generally make them pretty easy with a lot of preparation. I would give out study sheets and play review games for a couple of weeks before the test, and there was no reason that the students wouldn't do well on them. I had approval of admin to do this, as they weren't particularly fond of the final exam rule either, because it was just as the school board policy. A few nights before the offending boys had their exam, I had a brainwave and I created a second exam. Gone were the multiple choice questions and obvious things from the review sheets. In their place came detailed questions about concepts that were briefly mentioned in class. Essay question after essay question. Ambiguous questions with no clear answers, and definition of words that there was no way that they knew. It took a couple of hours, but I laughed the whole time. When the test came, I had the special exams at the bottom of the pile and handed them out to each of the 4 or 5 boys. I told my vice principal what was happening and he insisted on being present. I started the timer and watched as the boys flipped over their papers. It was all I could do to keep a straight face. Eyes went wide, heads were shaking, and panic was setting in, especially as they saw all of their classmates flying through their exams. One of the boys raised their hand and I just said, "Sorry, no questions during the final. You should be prepared based on your study sheets." I let them go for about 5 or 10 minutes of terror before I gather the fake tests and give them the real ones. They all passed with flying colors and never pranked my office again. It was glorious. I would love if one of the boys who are actually a victim of this pro revenge would post their version of the story, because I think that it would be hilarious. I mean, let's be honest, a lot of the stuff I read out doesn't tend to have a lighthearted undertone, and it's really nice when a story like this, which quite frankly, I think is a little bit wholesome, comes along the channel and makes me smile and laugh rather than me getting annoyed at stupid people or entitled parents. I don't know. Maybe out there somewhere, way in the depths of Reddit, there's a subreddit that's full of wholesome content, but honestly, with all of the stuff I read out, I don't like my chances of finding it. Let's call my a-hole boss Eugene, since his stinginess reminds me of Eugene Krabs from SpongeBob SquarePants, except Krabs is nowhere near malicious. In order to display the full satisfaction of this revenge, I will have to describe a few, but not limited things that Eugene did that entitles him to being a complete jackass. For the context, Eugene owns a small company that provides artistic services of some sort and never hired full-timers, which I later learnt that it was due to his stinginess. Initially, when I saw the part-time position, I thought it was ideal for me as I had external commitments and needed some sort of income. The job offers about $550 US per month. I don't live in the US and this is a rough conversion, but only required me to clock in about 90 hours a month. It wasn't a very good offer, but good enough for me as I considered myself to be inexperienced in this field. Note that Eugene had seen my portfolio and knew my ability level before hiring me. The first couple of months were fine. I worked the hours that I was supposed to and got paid accordingly, occasionally extending my shift at my own time due to the nature of work, but I didn't mind. I guess that Eugene saw this as an advantage that he could exploit later on during my employment. It was also important to note that Eugene would often ask about my well-being. How did I spend my weekends, etc. At this point in time, it all seemed like courtesy talk, so I didn't pay much attention to it. He would ask about my previous employment and my reason for leaving, which I answered honestly that their work system was unsuitable for me. This will be important later. Eugene gradually began to grow more impatient towards me. often blaming me for not being able to match up to his ability. Remember when I was inexperienced and thus the pay rate? Eugene had over a decade of experience in this field, and he expected me to be at his level when I was only 3 months in. The stress was intense, and I began working longer hours just to keep up and produce work at the best quality I could. I was under the belief that if I worked hard enough, my effort will speak. Even though this was only a part-time position, I overcommitted my time there and took pride in my work. My external commitments were barely scraping by. I was exhausted, but thought I was doing a good job until Eugene spoke to me one day. Eugene pulled me into his office and lectured me on my work etiquette, saying that I wasn't putting in enough effort and he was considering letting me go. At this point, I was beyond confused. Did he really not see the effort that I was putting in? Was I delusional in thinking that I was actually doing well and my work had been improving? I tried speaking up, but he quickly diverted the topic, telling me that he knew the reason why my previous employer hated me. It was because I was lazy and uncommitted. To say I was in disbelief was an understatement. Not only did I believe I did my best with every task handed to me, but Eugene had registered my flaws during casual conversation and twisted my words to his advantage. I had no idea how to react and simply asked him what he expected of me. He instantly replied that he would like me to double my hours working for him at the same monthly pay rate. His reasons are that it's my fault that I'm not experienced enough to produce quality work. Thus, it should be under my own responsibility and time to make up for it. My external commitments didn't matter, he said, as this job was my only source of income and should be kept as priority. It finally dawned to me that Eugene was a narcissistic sociopath who only held conversations so that he could learn a person's weakness for his manipulation. Now, if you read my title, you will see that Eugene was not only a narcissist, but also stingy AF. Eugene is obsessed with maximizing his profits. Any business owner would love that. I agree. But Eugene is down to every cent in immoral and even possibly illegal ways. He would sell a service to a client and upon receiving the deposit, deliver something else. He was smart enough to keep his contracts vague for both clients and employees so that no one could take legal action against him. More than often, his clients would be left to wit's end as it would be too late and expensive to engage another vendor by the time that they realized they had been scammed. Eugene would then demand another set of payments to deliver what he originally promised, overcharging a client an average of 100 to 200% more than what was agreed. Eventually realizing that they'd been played, most people would be too exhausted to pursue further action and prayed for the project to be over so that they didn't have to deal with his antics anymore. The inaction probably fed Eugene's ego that he could get away with playing dirty every single time. There are many more things that I would like to rant about Eugene, but this is a pro-revenge sub, not recruiting hell, so most of you would like to get to the good stuff soon. So in my country, employers are required to pay a certain amount of tax for every local employee that they hire. While it's not exactly tax, it is obligated by law, and negligence will result in a hefty fine and possibly jail time. These taxes are technically contributions for the employer's retirement fund, which is payable by every employer. The employer can deduct a certain percentage of the contributions from the employee's wage. This law has its own complications since there are a certain group of people exempt from it, such as students or interns. Now, Eugene is the classic example of a narcissist who thinks that he's smarter than everyone else. He felt that he was smart enough to evade the law by drafting a contract with vague details to protect himself, and was deluded enough to believe that everyone would believe him as long as he sounded convincing. In other words, he thought of people as sacks of potatoes with no opinions of their own. If anyone was to have a perspective, it had to be his way or the wrong way. I stayed in Eugene's company for about 4 months before I felt too mentally overwhelmed. On the day that I left, I called in to check my contribution account, and just as I had expected, Eugene hadn't paid a single cent over the past 4 months. The officer on the other end of the line asked me if I would like to report this as a case, and you can guess my answer. A week later, I received an update from the contribution board saying that Eugene had disputed my case, claiming that I was only an intern and thus exempt from the law. This jerk was playing dirty as a last attempt to steal from me. As I had mentioned, Eugene thought of himself as a smart man and probably thought that the officer would rule the case in his favor since he had world-class convincing skills and his vague contract would have protected him either way. Fine, Eugene. So you think that you can get away with this just like any other time? You must have gotten pretty confident by now. Well, not this time, Eugene. I wrote a 2-page long email to the contribution board officer with every reason and evidence that I can find on how I'm not an intern like Eugene claimed. Knowing his antics, I went the extra mile to research all of the exempt groups and wrote every possible reason on how I'm not in that category. Excessive? Yes. Worth it? Hell yes. I didn't hear from the officer for 2 weeks, and when I finally did, he informed me that Eugene had agreed to pay my contributions. Remember when I said that employers are permitted to deduct a certain percentage from employers' wages? Well, due to his negligence, Eugene could no longer do that and had to pay the full amount on top of the fines that were incurred along with it. If he had dutifully abided by the law, it would have only cost him a third of what he had to pay. So that is a bit of a-hole tax for you. Now that I've gotten back what I was owed, I decided to move on, but the story did not end there. An ex-colleague of mine, NJ, who is still working for Eugene, told me that during the 2 weeks I didn't hear from the officer, Eugene was busy fighting for his stand by giving every reason that I am an exempt individual. The officer, having seen my email, soon got tired of his nonsense and gave him a deadline to pay up or he'll be brought to court. NJ said that he'd never seen Eugene so defeated before. To top it off, it seemed like karma had finally caught up with him as he started losing more and more clients due to his unethical practices. The fine came to him when he had no clients that month, so it was a very obvious dent in his bank account. Ultimately, it was not a huge amount, but knowing Eugene's stinginess and ego, I think the damage was enough to qualify for this sub. Now, I don't think there's going to be a person either watching this video or even somebody that read this story full stop that would disagree with me when I say that Eugene probably deserved this and maybe even a little bit more. While it wasn't the most malicious or highly planned pro-revenge that I've ever read, it's one of the few times that I can honestly say that the person deserved absolutely everything that they got. I wonder if to this day, Eugene still treats his employees the exact same as he did back then, but let's be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if he still does, but I hope this story of pro-revenge was enough to change his ways. Years back, I worked for a large bank in the UK. We all worked on the same floor and in the same department, but within different teams. I was just passing through on a secondment and saw the beginning of this revenge, but was fielded on the aftermath later on. One of the teams was run by a woman called Sarah. Sarah was by many measures a good manager, but she had a blind spot. That blind spot was a woman called Helen. Now, when I was in my previous role, I interacted with Helen a fair bit and she had seemed friendly, but when it came to actually working with her, she was a nightmare. She would tattle, steal ideas and credit, and generally throw you under the bus at any opportunity. I'm not sure why Sarah always protected her, but it soon became a sore point for most people on the floor who had to deal with her. Enter Mike, who was the manager of a smaller team. Mike could be a bit of a dick, but was still professional and fun to work with. To give you an idea of his character, I found out I was being made redundant, and even though he wasn't my manager, he heard about it and booked time out to help me with my CV and do interview practice. Shortly after, it was announced that Mike's smaller team was being dissolved and the staff either made redundant or moved to other teams. At the time of cuts, the economy in the UK was in a bad state and all of the banks were looking for efficiencies. He was redeployed and took the vacant manager role under Sarah that Helen had been gunning for. To make matters worse, Helen now reported directly to him. Helen was furious and spent no time in making her discontent known as she felt that she was entitled to the promotion. Unfortunately for her, Mike was wise to her. They'd both joined the company around the same time, so he knew exactly what she was like. He'd even have blamed her for mistakes before. Heck, even the projects that she'd gotten so much praise for had been work that one of his staff had done. So, he started the process of documenting her poor work and attitude to manage her out of the business. Sarah, however, would not allow it. Helen was a high performer in her eyes, and she wouldn't sign off on him getting rid of her. When I left the team, Mike was frustrated with her and wasn't sure what to do. I met up with Mike a year later, and he shared how he solved the Helen problem with me because he knew all of the issues that I had with her. Because Sarah had his hands tied, his only other option to get Helen out of the team was for her to leave on her own accord. He couldn't oust her by making her life difficult or she'd go to Sarah, so he went the other way. This mother effer sat through every performance meeting with her for the rest of the year, gritting his teeth and praising her. That then justified him giving her a really high performance rating. He also used his own contacts to find roles in other teams at his grade that he then talked up to Helen. These roles were specifically selected because they specialized in one of the things that Helen claimed she was an expert at, but had very little real experience in. Basically roles where he knew that she'd have the highest chance of crapping the bed. Eventually she applied for one and he spent several weeks coaching her for the interview. In the company at the time, the interviews were scored off three main factors: performance rating and current role, competency-based interview results, and relevant experience. He'd done everything he could to make her shine in all three. She took the promotion and within 2 months had quit the bank. He knew that she wasn't ready for the responsibility, didn't have the skills, and her poor work ethic would be exposed. Worst case, she'd get her crap together and he'd still look like the perfect manager to Sarah. I know for a fact that in these industries, this type of thing happens all too often. However, if you look at this story and you look at the amount of detail and the amount of thought that went into actually getting this woman to quit the company, especially when you look at the performance review side of things and you look at the long game that this guy played to make this happen, you might not normally consider managing someone out of a position to be pro-revenge, but this guy, with the amount of detail he's put into his plan, that to me is some pro-revenge. Alright everyone, that is going to be that for today's episode of Pro Revenge. I just want to start off by saying thank you so much for watching and I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have stuck around for this long and you did enjoy those awesome stories, make sure to leave a like on the video below, and just a reminder that if we can hit 5,000 likes, the next episode of Entitled Parents will be 30 minutes long. Make sure to let me know in the comments below as well if you have any awesome stories that qualify for Pro Revenge, Petty Revenge, or anything of the sort, and next time we do an episode of one of those, I'll definitely look at including it for you. Make sure to follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Bumfris. The links to both of those are in the description as well though. But I don't want to drag this out too much, so I am going to wrap things up there. However, before I do, I just want to remind you guys that there are two awesome videos on your screen right now, one of which I would highly suggest that you click on to cure your boredom. If you like this video, you're definitely going to like those and you will not be disappointed. Otherwise, I just want to say again, thank you so much for watching. I hope you're all having a fantastic day, and I'll see you guys at the same time tomorrow for another video. Bye.